the second night of Forge Debates 2018. My name is Luke Baldwin. On Tuesday, we spoke to the candidates for International Officer, Activities, Development and President. You can see all these debates along with expert analysis on the Forge TV YouTube channel and Facebook page. Tonight, we'll be chatting with the candidates for Education, Women's Officer, Welfare and Sport. You can keep up with all the action with our live blog on forgetoday.com/elections or through our Twitter page @NewsOnForge. You can have your say using the hashtag KnowYourVote. Between each debate, we'll have expert punditry from Matthew and Susanna in our studio, so let's head over there now.
Good evening, I'm Susanna Burton. I'm joined today by
Matthew Hartill. Thank you very much to Luke, and we'll be coming back here after each debate where we'll be joined with three pundits to look on who came out on top and who had the best policies.
So head on to Twitter @NewsOnForge and use hashtag KnowYourVote to keep up to date with all the action that goes on during the debates. And you can also keep up to date whenever during the time of elections at forgetoday.com/elections.
Now let's head back over to Luke Baldwin in View Delhi with the women's debate.
Okay, so I am joined by the candidates for Women's Officer. From left to right, we have Jessie McGuinness, Maida Taya, and Melinda, or Mel. How do you pronounce the second name?
Aqua.
Nice. So, we're just going to jump right into it. The first question is for Jessie. Jess, compared to your fellow candidates, you don't have much experience around the union bubble or with student politics. Do you think this makes you less qualified for the role?
I don't think at all. I think in regards to Women's Officer, it's all about equality for other communities too. And in Greece, I did a year abroad last year, and I worked with LGBT plus refugees and women. And so I've got some sort of real-world application to transfer over to my skills here. I'm also Vice President of the Criminology Society, so I've got sort of skills with leadership roles within the union in that sense.
My next question for you is regarding your Feminist Fridays policy. We're just wondering what this would actually entail.
I think it would be every Friday sort of a celebration of women and women's achievements. So I think to take place in the union, we could have sort of celebrations going on as to what women have done, achievements, and women in history. I think it would be really important to sort of focus on this. You know, every Friday we should be celebrating this.
So what sort of events around the union, though, would that sort of entail? Would it be kind of talks, or...?
I think maybe sort of careers talks. We could have sort of inspirational women that in certain positions. And also maybe just holding general things on the concourse and just things like that.
So, next is Maida. You said that you want to expand consent and relationship education. Can you be more specific about what this would be?
Excuse me. This ties into kind of my policy of challenging staff-student misconduct. Even if there is a consensual relationship between staff and student, what is consent in that relationship when one party is in position of power and responsibility? So I want to expand the consent to education to cover all of these issues because staff-student misconduct is such a huge issue right now. The NUS Women's Officer is doing a national campaign on this. I guess generally as well, if you look at all the sexual harassment cases that have been coming out throughout the whole 2017 and probably will in 2018 as well, clearly the consent education that is present right now is not working and is not effective enough. So we need to make changes to that and make it more clear and include all the areas, even if not just talk about like, oh, you can't do this because this is criminally sexual assault, but also cover things like which are just not acceptable acts in general. It's not a polite way to act.
Okay, so the next question would be, how would you go about teaching these lessons to the larger student body? Like, by what means?
So the university already does do consent talks in accommodations at the start of every year, but we need to, it's really hard to cover all of student body, because I guess there is the element, because when you're teaching about consent, there's an element you want people to be there because they've consented to be. You can't force all of the students to be like, you have to attend this talk, but we're going to teach you about consent. So that will be hard, but what I can only do is try to make these talks more wider, make sure like all students are being told about these, that these are being held, and it's very important that you do attend them. Maybe do like to encourage students, do like a prize draw or something, like you'll get Pop-Tart tickets or something like that, what they're doing with, you know, voting right now. Like if you vote, you'll enter a prize draw, just to encourage students to do this. I guess all you can do is just try and see if it, you know, makes a difference and works. Personally, like practically, I don't think you can do like these lessons or talks and get every student on campus to come and attend them. That would be impossible.
But do you not worry a bit that the kind of people that would need these talks and that actually would benefit most from these talks wouldn't even be aware that they need these talks and therefore wouldn't even think about attending?
Yeah, exactly. That's the complication. Because when you're teaching about consent, you can't force them to come and attend the consent lesson because they haven't given consent to be there, so that doesn't make sense. But then also the people who actually do need it don't care about it. They're not going to read an email and be like, oh yeah, I want to attend that. The people who will attend it are the people who do actually care about consent or stuff like this. So I guess, like I said, it's a really hard one. It's really complicated, but all you can do is just try and push it and make sure that the means are there, the sources are there, if someone does want to, you know, use them. So that's all. I feel like that's all we can do. We can give them the sources.
Okay, so my next question is for Mel. You've spoken about providing a safe space for women within the union, where they can kind of talk and feel comfortable. Considering there's a severe lack of space around the union already, how do you think you'll be able to, do you have any plans of where this space would be or how you would go about booking out this space?
A lot of the rooms in the union aren't like always booked out, so I guess I'd go around making sure that maybe there's like a Facebook sort of like post that alerted everyone to where the room would be like each week, so then everyone knows that it's a safe space that exists, but it might not be the same room like every single like week or day, but at least they'd have the opportunity to visit somewhere and be able to talk about their issues and any problems they might have.
Thank you. So my follow-up question would be, there are quite a lot of other groups that come into the women's officer role that need to be represented, and I know a lot of them would like their own dedicated space as well. Do you not feel that some of them would feel marginalised by kind of women getting a priority in terms of getting their own space? I know that there are other groups that would like their own as well.
I feel as though they might feel marginalised, but a lot of these people also fall into the category of women as well. And I feel like it's a project that can be extended to include like other liberation groups and like to ensure that everyone is included, because the whole point of the women's officer role is to be inclusive and to try and make our SU a more inclusive place where people feel like welcome and safe. So ideally, like it's something that can be expanded to like various other groups.
So just moving on from that, like I said, obviously the main focus of all your manifestos is generally women's issues, but like you mentioned, there are other groups that you represent as part of your role. So we're just going to go around and see how many you can name. There are 6 in total to get, including the obvious one, which I won't say. But so we will start with Mel.
Would you like me to...
Just one each, and then
one
we'll go
each,
around.
okay. LGBT.
LGBT?
BME.
Oh, flipping heck. Women.
Women is one, yes.
Disabled students.
Mature students.
One more to get to, fair.
international, or is that covered in?
It's already covered by international. The last one is postgrads.
Oh.
To be fair, you can draw the short straw with the last one there.
Yeah.
So, thinking about this, how do you think you will be able to represent these groups? Obviously, like I said, your main focus was on women. So, starting with Jessie, how would you say?
I think just ensuring that when we are implementing policies and introducing new things, that they do encompass equality across the board and encompass different ideals and notions within them that will sort of be attractive and sort of represent these different groups. I don't know if it's sort of realistic, but a way it could be done is if they could have sort of volunteer representatives for each group that could sort of say what they're after, what their needs are, and then you could sort of base your policies around sort of real ideas of what, you know, these groups want.
Mel?
Personally, for me, I feel like it's all about listening. Obviously, I'm part of like one of the groups that was mentioned just now, and yeah, it's all about listening for me. Like, it's just making sure that my voice is heard. So like, obviously there's different ways to do that, like introducing people to stand in for those specific groups, doing like workshops so people can come and like voice their opinions. Again, the whole project with safe spaces would be a way to understand like what the issues that people are facing and all that kind of stuff. Also, social media plays a pretty important role in that as well. There could be polls online, like you could have a Twitter account that people send DMs to find out like how like the issues that they're facing, that sort of thing. Like, it's all about just listening to people and ensuring that their voice is heard, really.
Aida?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, obviously, there are groups other than women's that are fall under your role. How would you make sure that you represent all of these groups, not just women?
Okay, so there is a part of my manifesto which is just dedicated to liberation, which has policies that are, you know, involves all these groups. And then I have a policy under my safety section of the manifesto, which is on hate crime, that includes all of these groups as well. So first of all, to say, how will I represent? You can't. So you have to acknowledge that because I don't belong to each of these groups, I can never fully represent each and every one of them. I can maybe fully say, like, understand and work on behalf of BME students, but other than that, it's the experience that I have that will lead me to talk to other groups. Because I've worked, being the chair of Women's Committee, I've been collaborating with other liberation groups throughout the year. So we did a full a year-long campaign on #LetWomenBe, which had, you know, parts of sub-campaigns including women from different liberation groups. So we collaborated with LGBT+ committee, BME committee, international students as well. So that experience I will bring into this role and talk to them, listen to them, and do what I have learned to do throughout this year. But I will not say that, yes, just being a woman and BME, I'm here to represent all of these groups, because no, I'm not. I can never understand their struggles. I can never fully represent them because I'm not one of them.
So, in your role, you deal with a lot of students' disclosures about sexual assault and violence, which can be quite distressing, as you can imagine. How would you personally deal with this? Because obviously it is a huge responsibility and a lot of added weight. Like I said, how would you deal with this? We'll start with Maida on this one.
Do you mean, what, if I was a victim, how would I deal with this?
No. So in this role, a lot of students come forward with these problems.
Sorry. Well, I guess because of the degrees I've done, it's not like, yes, it's disturbing, but I can take it. I've done an undergrad in law and criminology, and I'm doing a master's in international criminology, and I'm going to do a dissertation on human trafficking. I have, like, for the last 4 years, I have been studying about sexual abuse, different other types of violent crime that especially involve women, because that's my area of interest. So I guess I can stomach these kind of things because, like, I have been studying about it and stuff. But yes, other than that, you have to make sure that you're talking to someone as well and not just taking it all alone, because yes, it can get too much. It is a very heavy thing to deal with. Like, if someone's come to you, complain to you about something, make sure there is a member of staff or someone, like, I wouldn't say in your family because there will be confidentiality issues, but someone in the staff who is involved where you can go and talk to them and say, like, this is really affecting me, and make sure that you are well as well, because you can only do the job if you look after yourself too.
Jessie?
I think because we're not specifically trained in dealing with issues, I think as a women's officer, you'd be sort of the first response that they would go to, and you'd offer that first level of support, but then you'd be able to sort of refer them to sort of local authorities we have in Sheffield, such as Sheffield DACT, which is the Domestic Abuse Communication Team, and they deal with sort of things revolving around sexual abuse, sexual harassment, stalking, and sexual relationships and so on. And so I think you, as a women's officer, you would offer that sort of first level of support, and then you would then sort of tell them where they can go for the sort of, you know, the backup support and the real people that they need to help them with that.
And Mel?
For me, I feel like you have to focus on, like, the 3 C's, which should be confidentiality, communication, and clarity. I feel like confidentiality, because they're coming to you because they know that, one, their voice is going to be heard, but that you're going to keep their, like, opinions and any issues that they have, like, just to yourself, and sort of not really, like, spread their business. And communication, because, like, obviously you have to listen to them, but also, like, advise them on how to best manage the situation. And clarity, because I feel like it's about clearly letting anyone that is facing any issues know, like, how you're going to deal with the situation. And that could take the form of different, like, organizations that you can, like, signpost them to, but at the end of the day, but it's all about, like, making sure that they understand that this is the next step that's going to happen. Because often if you're going through something or you're experiencing any, like, issues and there's no clarity, it can make it a lot harder for you and make it a lot, like, more stressful. So that would be the way I'd deal with it.
And so this next question is from LGBT Plus Committee. What specific issues concerning LGBT Plus students would you address in your time as Women's Officer? I think we'll start with Jessie on that one.
I think specifically hate crime and raising awareness around hate crime. I think for many of us, it's not something that we do see every day or something that we turn a blind eye to. And I think raising awareness of this is key. As I said, working with LGBT plus refugees in Greece, I saw a lot of the things they went through on a daily basis that many of us wouldn't. And so I think it's celebrating the LGBT community, but also raising awareness of the struggles that they do go through and making sure that people are aware of this and that this does happen every day, even though many of us don't see it.
Maida?
So there's a part of it, I have a policy on making the university health services cater for marginalised groups, which is there will be a focus especially on LGBT plus community, because I think we need, especially when it comes to counselling service, we need more LGBT plus counsellors who are able to understand the issues of LGBT plus students more than, having someone who doesn't belong to that community. Secondly, I also have a policy on hate crime. Our Students Advice Centre is our hate crime reporting centre. A lot of students don't know that. If they do experience any kind of hate crime, they don't know what to do, where to go. So I think it's very important to advertise that properly and more openly so all people know what to do.
And Mel?
I'd like to focus specifically on discrimination and transphobic and homophobic behavior as well, and also also like look at issues within the actual community itself, because sometimes it can be that it comes from within the community that like these like behaviors are displayed. So like divisions within the community, I feel like that's a really important thing that sometimes is overlooked. So like particularly within our Sheffield like student environment. Yeah.
That's what you mean, yeah. So, last sort of 30 seconds or so, just to summarise, why do you think you would make a good women's officer? We'll start with Mel on that one.
I'm passionate, I'm driven. I'm a woman myself that has experienced a lot of the issues that women face. I try my hardest to understand not just what women are going through, but other liberation groups as well. And I feel like I can put all of that passion and that drive and the experience that I've got like behind me to ensure that I can be the best women's officer that Sheffield has to offer, really.
Okay. And Maida?
I have the experience, but other than that, I feel very, very passionate about this. This is why I'm here doing this again. I did this last year as well. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't this passionate. Maybe I'm too passionate. So that's why I will put my heart and soul into this because it's so important to me. I find peace in helping people and representing people. I couldn't see myself doing anything else.
Okay. And really quick, Jessie?
I think with the work I did in Greece, I've got sort of reward application and a lot of sympathy and what these people actually go through. And also, again, I'm a woman myself, so I understand the things we need in place and, you know, the troubles we face.
Yeah. And that is it for the women's officers, or women's candidates, should I say, not officers yet. So, again, that was Jessie, Maida and Mel. We're going to go to the studio now for some punditry. Cheers. Up next is education.
Hello, my name is Susanna Burton, and I am joined here by our three lovely pundits. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Simone, and I'm a second-year Berkham student.
Hi, I'm Arya, and I'm a first-year English literature student.
Hi, I'm JC, and I'm a final-year journalism student.
Thank you very much, guys. And we are going to be here. We are your first team tonight. We're going to be discussing that debate with the women's officers. Well, to start us off, do you think that there was a clear winner of that debate? If I pass over to Josie first.
Yeah, personally, I think Maida and Mel both stood out. I'm not sure I could necessarily pick one of them over the other, but maybe possibly Maida. She just seemed to really know her stuff and be really informed about a lot of things and be able to do the job well when it came down to it.
What do you think, Ira?
Yeah, I actually agree for the most part. I think generally another thing that Maida did well is that she was kind of consistent with her ideas. So when she said, you know, when she was talking about she was saying we can't have a consent talk but then force people to go, you know. That showed like a side of sort of analysis in the things that she was thinking about.
That's a good point. And what do you think? Do you think, Simone?
Yes, there's definitely a huge part of analysis and, you know, self-awareness that is always a good part to have. I think she stood out, but the level of the debate was quite high for all the candidates, so that's really going to be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, definitely one to watch. So what do you think would make a good women's officer? What qualities were you looking for from the candidates this evening? If I start with you, Simone.
I think the women's officer has a particular role which involves a lot of balancing. So you need to be able to represent your own community, but also being able to kind of not get into the point of alienating others. That is one of the key parts of the roles. And then I think DC is specifically is very topical, and we all know a lot of issues are now everywhere in the news. And I think there's a lot of pressure on universities and a lot of in general in the world. So that is going to be a capability to hold on to this and be a voice for most people as much as you can.
So it's more of a voice for minorities.
Yeah, I feel like that. I feel like especially with the all scandal that have happened and that clearly played a role, I think like you'll be able to be a voice of all the women in the union and also other groups that maybe feel marginalized.
Do you guys agree with that? Is that what you think the women's officer is? Is there any particular qualities that you think that the candidates particularly need to show?
Well, I think that it's definitely a position that requires when you hear them talking about abuse and sort of sexual issues, and it's a position where you need to be, you're sort of more so than the other officers, I think, looking after people who maybe need help in a sense. So yeah, I would also to a degree agree with like the sort of width of how much you need to deal with, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree as well, and I think as well as delicacy and dealing with everything really sensitively, I think they've got to be pretty resilient as well. I think that comes with it, and I think it came across in that debate there, and it's something that they kind of, touched upon with the questions and how they would deal with talking to people about, really difficult situations like sexual abuse. And honestly, they all seemed pretty great and like they'd be able to deal with doing the job.
I would definitely agree that the three definitely all seem that they had those qualities, not quantities. Do you think there was a candidate that surprised you in that debate? Was there someone who came out that you weren't expecting, or someone who you thought was going to be stronger than actually they were? Josie?
I personally was only, previously familiar with Maida, having seen her last year, and I was surprised that she didn't do very well. I was expecting her to win, I honestly was. But Mel I hadn't heard of, and I thought Mel spoke really well and really clearly, and she just seemed so chill and confident, but then knew exactly what to say and was very composed, so I was quite impressed with that.
What about you, Simone?
I think, I think Mel was a bit of a surprise because I've heard of Maida, I've seen on the manifesto, she had some experience and you expect that all the experience you have will come into this and will, make a candidate that knows what they are dealing with if they have experience before. But I think Mel stood out. I wasn't expecting her to be such a strong performer in this debate.
Would you agree with that one, Ira?
Well, being in my first year and everything, I don't... In terms of surprise for individual candidates, and I also haven't really met any of them before, but in terms of surprise, I guess the surprise for me came from how people sort of seeing younger people dealing with a very sort of delicate and difficult issue, so or set of issues rather, and taking on a role with sort of strength that you might not have expected if you're new to the whole environment.
Yeah, it is quite amazing that these girls are in their early 20s and able to deal with such difficult and challenging issues with so much composure. Going on to those kind of issues that they're going to have to work with, do you think that they would all be equally qualified to work with LGBT plus issues, to work with minority issues as well as the women's role?
Yeah, I was really glad that there were questions that popped up, particularly near the end, with the question coming directly from LGBT plus committee, because although it's called the Women's Officer, it is really the Liberations Officer, and they've got to be there for all liberation groups, and I genuinely felt from listening to all of them that they would do their best, but I think Maida was the one who actually had policies in place for all of those liberation groups, so I felt like she kind of did the better job at acknowledging the broader compass of the role.
Is there anything anyone else would like to add to that one?
Yeah, well, I just think, again, speaking as a first year, I guess, it was bizarre to kind of look through the candidates list and see people underneath women's officer candidates sort of dealing with other minority issues. So I guess it does kind of speak to a wider sort of thing about liberations overall and how connected these things are. So, yeah.
On that note, do you think perhaps that it's time that instead of having just a women's officer, do you think that it should be rebranded to something like Liberations Officer, as you suggested? Simone?
I would be quite in support of this because it would just not detract from any of the part of the role, but it would just acknowledge the other responsibility. And I think making that clearer would make everyone, including the officer, more aware of them. and would also help making those issues more visible and making them easier part of call for all liberation issues.
Josie?
Yeah, I agree. I think a liberation officer would be a great idea, and it would mean that anybody who self-identified in any liberation group could apply instead of somebody who just self-identifies as a woman. And yeah, I just think that maybe if every year you had somebody who identified within a different group, you'd get a different focus than you would. I think there's a danger with it being called the women's officer, that there'll always be more of a focus on women, although of course there should be. There shouldn't entirely be, it should be shared a little bit.
Yeah. I was also wondering, do you think that because we've only got the 3 candidates in the debate, do you think that spurs it on as quite a limited debate, or do you think that having the 3 candidates gives us more of an opportunity? Okay, we're going to hand straight over actually now back to Luke for the education debate.
And welcome back to the second debate tonight. We're here with the candidates for the education officer. From left to right, we have Chris, Amber, Anna, and George. So my first question, just a quick warm-up question, is if you could be any children's cartoon character, who would you be? So we'll start with George.
I think I would be Dappy the Duck. Like, I'm friendly, I'm a little bit clumsy, but everyone wants to give you a big hug, and I love just eating carrots.
Anna?
I'd definitely be Lisa Simpson, just because she's a badass and she annoys everyone, but she has all her ideas set.
Amber?
I think I will be a little star. Not too shining, but bright enough to let people see me.
And Chris?
I guess I'd have to be Postman Pat. He always had lots of adventures on the way, lots of mishaps, but at the end of the day, he always came through and got your post delivered.
Beautiful. So my first question of education is to George again. Yeah. In your manifesto, you say you'd like to challenge the academic ableism, sexism, racism, and homophobia in university. This is quite a strong claim, so I was just wondering if you could explain this further and justify this policy.
So recently in the computer science department, as we've discussed in the LGBT committee, is some of the lecturers have been quite homophobic in the way that they were teaching and referring to people. So I think that we all can agree in a 21st century education system that there's just simply not something that we can tolerate. And so also, as a disabled student, I see the ableism in modern academia from a first-hand perspective. So I've been subject to it and I've seen it. And over the last year, I've been a researcher for the university on equality, diversity and inclusions for the university. So I think this job set has actually really set me up to be able to help me to be able to achieve those aims. And recently I presented this report to the Vice President for Education in the university and the heads of all services for all students, such as DDSS, 301 Glossop Road, the counselling service, and they all took on our criticisms in the research and really were happy about what we had to say. So I think having first-hand knowledge on the failings of these systems, but also what we could do to celebrate good practice is something that is a skill that is very, very important to the education officer, because every service that is available at the university is to facilitate the learning of the students. So my first-hand knowledge involved in this research project will be undoubtedly beneficial, really, I guess. Yeah.
So, just another point on your manifesto. You aim to remove the need for medical evidence for extensions on coursework and exams. Without this sort of regulation, how can extensions possibly be guaranteed or be used responsibly by all students? Do you not think that maybe this is a bit idealistic?
Well, if you look at a model that is currently exists in the University of York, which they actually place a position of trust onto the students, because no one's forced you to come to this degree. No one said, oh, you have to do this PPE course or politics, whatever. So if you don't do the amount of credits by the end of your degree, then you simply just don't graduate. So where is this need to punitively punish students for not doing their work at the time if they have mental health difficulties or disabilities? As we know, the union resources, the university resources are overstretched, such as UCS and the health service. So actually getting a doctor's note can not always be that easy. So why are we punishing students for not being able to fit into this linear education system that we're all not the same?
Okay. My next question is for Chris. So, you want to introduce an SU Work Placement Fund for unpaid placements. How do you plan to pay for this, given that the SU runs on such a strict budget and is non-profit?
Finding money for new programs is always a difficulty, but it would undoubtedly be something that I would hope to achieve. It would be a scheme run by applications. And so,
how would you actually fund it, though?
It would work within a budget, and I would see if it was achievable under the aims of...
are you aware that the union's under a current process of a VAT payment that hasn't gone through for the last 5 years? Last year, the union had a reserve of £500,000, but this VAT refund could be up to £250,000. So I think we need to prioritise liberation at the forefront of a union before we start tackling those things. Whilst I do agree with it, and I think it's a really great thing to start introducing, I think there's more important matters at the uphand of the union struggle.
Chris, could I just ask, before you answer,
Yes.
just to make sure I'm nice and close?
Sure, no problem. I agree that there are many priorities that the union needs to look at. But I also believe that employment is one of the key tools we can use as a university and a union to widen the opportunities for students to gain experience while they're at university. The Discover Your Future scheme that's run through the university is a great scheme for allowing first-time, first-generation students and working-class students to gain access to unpaid internships through a fund. But it is very competitive and there are lots of barriers to it. It would be my aim, if it was possible, to introduce a similar scheme run by the union to just give that extra level, extra piece of support, if it were possible to put it into practice.
So, just to follow up to that, another one of your campaign points are that you want to provide £5 worth of printing free for every student. Now, this kind of policy has been attempted before. We've heard a lot about free printing during these elections. Giving roughly 30,000 students £5 each amounts to potentially £150,000. Where are you going to get this sort of money?
The university has offered free printing for students in the past, and it has been more generous in the past. And also, it is not equal across departments. Some departments offer students more free printing, some departments offer less free printing. I want to make sure that all students have access to an equal amount of printing credit. And I think £5 is a reasonable sum for all students. It would, again, be something we would work to, but I think it's a fair aim to have all students given the same amount of free printer credit.
My next question is for Anna. So, a large part of your manifesto looks at widening access to universities. How would you argue the university is not doing enough or even failing with widening participation schemes, considering there are summer school programs that currently run for local pupils from underprivileged backgrounds?
Part of my manifesto, I never said in my manifesto that it was failing. I just want to expand it more. Last year I was an Us in Schools mentor, so I was worked in the pre-16 outreach program with the university, and it was a really amazing experience. And part of my manifesto promise for widening access is to get more of our current students involved within the schemes, because it can be I know a lot of people who are involved in the mentoring scheme were wanting to go on to do teaching, so they're doing it as experience, but I think it would be beneficial for our students, for the local community, and the high school students that are in the scheme to have a most wide range of students going into those schools. So that was mainly part of my manifesto. I'm not at all saying that the uni is failing. I just want our university to be the #1 in the country for widening participation and access.
Do you not worry somewhat that the focus there is on students who aren't actually students here yet, when realistically in your 1-year period in the role, you should have a focus on the students that are actually already here that have voted you in.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but like I said, my manifesto promise is to get current students involved within the scheme, because I think it's beneficial for students and for the local community, and it looks really good for our university to be working within the community and for students here to not be living in their student bubble and to be going out into the wider community.
I would agree with Anna and both George, because they both offer in their manifestos, and there is some overlap in terms of outreach and widening participation. The University Outreach and Widening Participation Unit is a well-funded department and offers quite a lot in terms of the Realising Opportunities programme that it uses. But it also works to get the students the experience of teaching in schools, and that's quite valuable. And each faculty also has widening participation officers that work on outreach programmes per faculty. I think it's very important to get a relationship between the university and the local schools. And the last two presidents, Dom Trendle and Kieran Maxwell, have both made it one of their priorities and have made great progress in there. It remains to be seen, though, I think, how we can go above and beyond what's already been delivered.
Do you have a response to that about how we can go above and beyond?
Yeah, I think you can always improve in what you're doing. And like I said, when I was an Us in Schools mentor, all the other volunteers were ones who are now, they're teaching, they wanted to be teachers, they're doing it for experience. And I personally did it as something a little bit different. I'd never thought about teaching before, and I would like to encourage more students who maybe don't want to go into teaching just to participate in their local community, because I think it's really important for the student experience to live outside of that student bubble, and that's what my kind of manifesto promise about that is, to include current students in it.
Just another point on one of your manifestos. You plan to lobby the government into reintroducing maintenance grants. This is a pretty big task.
It is a big task.
Do you think this is a good use of your time, considering your role has a lot of responsibilities? And like I said, any of the officers will tell you it is a very, very busy job.
Yeah, completely. But if you look at the job description, one part of it is campaigning for educational interest and student interest. And I believe a huge part of the problem with our higher educational system at the moment is marketisation. Part of this has been the removal of grants. Lower income students are leaving university with £57,000 worth of debt compared with higher income students. And I believe it is a big dream and it is a big idea, but I believe that the most tangible way to help students is to lobby the government for the reintroduction of grants.
So what skills do you think that you currently already have to, what would your first point of call to be able to lobby the government? Because obviously, like, as someone that's not an officer in any constituency of the Labour Party, that's not engaged, that's not an MP, how would you do that? Because, like, currently I'm a national committee member for an organisation called the National Campaign Against Fees and Cuts, and we organised the student demo that the Students' Union went on the 15th of November in this last year, and the famous ones from 2010, 2011 and 2015, which brought London to halt and hold the government to account for those actions. Do you think you could do that just by yourself?
Yeah, I do completely believe I can do that. I've been part of the
200,000 students in London, you could do that yourself?
Do what? Lead a march? For 20,000 students. Part of being an education officer is a campaigning role, and it's also a collaborative role. I'd work with all the other officers, and I would also hope to work with other universities and the NUS to lobby the government. I'm not a one-woman machine. I'm not
Amateo Doku, who is currently the NUS VPE for the NUS, doesn't actually believe, as at a Labour students' conference last week, and he actually just says he doesn't believe in a free education or the complete reintroduction of maintenance grants. So why would you work with the NUS when actually they don't follow your own personal policies?
I completely believe in working collaborative, and I believe that we sometimes have to work with people who might not have the ideas that we have, but if you truly believe and you believe that it's the best interest of your students, I would try and work with organisations who might have slightly different views, but if that's the way to do it, then I believe completely in doing that.
I think it is in the interest of the students here that they have a voice as the education officer who will fight for the reintroduction of maintenance grants, and the government is in a very weak position currently. I would see the education officer, as Anna has pointed out, somebody who can work collaboratively with the education officers at other universities, working to achieve that aim. I don't necessarily think that the aim that that will be brought around through marching. It will be done behind the scenes.
Unfortunately, I will have to stop you there because we have a lot to get through. Amber, the question for you is, every year we see candidates propose a free bus service or attempt to change the timetable. You've proposed both of these. How do you plan to make these changes happen?
Sorry?
So, every year we see candidates propose a free bus service or attempt to change the timetable. Obviously, this has been quite unsuccessful in the past. What makes you different? Why do you think you can get these changes through?
Actually, I think in our Sheffield is a big city, and a lot of company, they make money not only by the bus, but the bus is really important for university students. For example, the student live near the Peak District and near the enclave. Normally, they need use £2 or £4 per day, but actually, sometimes we don't need that too much money. What I mean is maybe we just only have 1 or 2 main bus free line to cover more students. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Do you not think that would be quite expensive, though, to do, especially considering we already maintain, say, a women's bus, and I think a lot of people would rather investment went into that than into introducing a completely new bus service?
I think free bus can replace the women minibus. It can make more students have more benefit. I mean,
do you not think that the...
I'm going to have to disagree with that because the safety of women on our campus is far more important.
Sorry, George,
I didn't hear you speak. I do apologise.
Sorry. I was just going to say, do you not think that the Women's Minibus is a really important institution that we have at the university? And if anything, it needs more funding, not to be cut altogether?
I think women is really important. But we still have a lot of different kinds of students. They still need to take care of.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. But I completely disagree that you could get rid of the women's minibus altogether, seems as it's such a lifeline for so many women after nights out and after the library getting home in the dark.
Okay, thank you. Because I think sometimes the women minibus, they won't have enough women to take the bus. Sometimes maybe just 1 or 2 girls use the bus, but if we can change the women minibus to free bus, maybe we can take care of more students. That's what I mean. Thank you.
So, just last general question for each year, it's about 30 seconds each on this one. Students are angry that their lectures have been cancelled due to strike action. Quite a topical one, this. They're blaming staff, saying they're selfish to put their own needs before the needs of students. What would be your response? We will start with Chris on that one.
I am a UCU member and I do support the strike, but I fully agree that the students are right to be angry simply because there isn't the clarification currently on what will happen to their assessment. Some departments have already seen their assessments being cancelled. I think in as soon as possible, staff and the students need to be informed what's going to happen, considering that newspapers have come out today saying there might be a marking and graduation strike. We need clarification as soon as possible.
Amber?
I think we need to protect our teacher, but at the same time, we need to take care of our students' benefit. Because students, every year, they cost a lot of money to university, especially for international students. They have a research at the university, the King University. I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Anyway, they made a research for international students. If the strike continue doing it, it may waste 6,000 to 7,000 pounds for per international students. It's really a disaster. So, as a student, as an international student office, education officer, I want to solve the tension between strike and the international student and EU student and home student.
Anna?
Yeah, I completely understand that a lot of students are really angry, especially if you're in your final year of study, you're confused, like you don't know what's happening. But I think that it's really dangerous if this anger gets misplaced onto the lecturers and onto the staff who are striking, because it's like Keith Burnett, our Vice-Chancellor, and the people in the higher powers who've caused this by not negotiating. So I think, yes, students should be angry and students should be concerned, but they should be placing their anger on these people and not on our staff who are striking.
And George?
So until 1 o'clock this morning, I was flyering and postering around campus with a group of activists called the Free University of Sheffield to show support to our staff. Then at 7:30 this morning, I was awake on the picket. As a UCU member, I think it's absolutely imperative that the student staff solidarity that we saw today continues, because it's absolutely amazing. There's stories in Bath of 2,000 students marching through Bath University against their Vice-Chancellor, and I just think the staff-student solidarity is very important. And I've been engaged with the UCU since just after Christmas. We met the UCU. I met with them on the 3rd of January in that room just there where the pundits are taking place, to discuss how we'll control the narrative for students. I've been engaged with the strike since the day one, since we've been told as students. But also when Wyn Morgan, the president for education at the university, sent an email out informing us all of the strike, I made sure that I stood up for international students to stop the monitoring as per my manifesto. So I sent an email to Wyn Morgan to say, for students that are on Tier 6 level visas, what is going to happen to the monitoring for their attendance during the strike? Because I didn't want any more students being deported or held in detention centres because their attendance fell below a certain point. So I'm not only just standing up, and I've been working with Gracie and the disabled officer on LGBT about how disabled students will still get their services.
I'll stop you there, George.
So yeah, I'm a UCU member. I support the strike. I'll be there at 7:30 tomorrow. I hope to see you all there as well.
So thank you very much to all our education candidates. Again, that is Chris, Amber, Anna and George. We're going to go over to the studio for a bit more punditry. Up next is welfare. Cheers.
Thanks very much indeed, Luke, and I am joined by 3 pundits here to try and discuss a little bit about what we saw there. They are Ben Warner, Ari Adamavandi and Tim Adams. So Ben, if I can come to you first. George Bunn, quite a vocal figure in the debate, to say the least. He quite surprisingly maybe, said he wanted to challenge academic ableism, racism and homophobia, and he spoke about how widespread he thought it was across the uni. Is that something you agree with, you see yourself?
Across the university or across the union?
Across the union, sorry.
I don't know, but equally, I'm not someone who would experience that kind of discrimination being a straight white man. It's just not something that I ever experienced and that often I'm not aware of. But I should imagine that maybe it is something that can come up in certain areas or in certain debates quite regularly.
And Ari, if I can come to you, Chris spoke about wanting to find a work placement fund for unpaid placements, but there was a little bit of confusion about how he was going to fund that. Does that sort of worry you that he might not be so hot on his figures and his numbers?
Well, I guess with a workplace, with something like that, it would be something that would, if you're lobbying for it, you want to, it's something that requires a lot of organisation and requires that level of understanding, I guess. But I still think that you need the energy behind it and the drive to want to actually put something like that in place. So if he got it in place and then didn't know how to manage it or something like that, or that would be worrying, I guess.
Yeah. And Tim, sort of sticking with the theme of funding, Amber wants to start a free bus service and push for more public transportation. There were concerns again about funding with that.
Yeah, I think the logistics behind that could be quite difficult. 2 years ago we saw Dom Trendle try to get a 20p discount on Aviva buses in the local area, and that took a year to get into in the initiation. And it was widely accepted that that was one of Dom's best achievements and sort of one of the legacies that he did actually leave behind. And the fact that this free bus service, it sounds nice, but it's the phrase that you get your cake and you eat it all. So I don't think that that's going to be achievable in this sense, but it is a nice idea.
Absolutely. And Anna, Ben, she wants to widen access to union participation. For me, I've got my first year, but I felt that the uni does quite a lot of work with participation, but she clearly feels there's room for improvement. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the uni is quite good for getting people in. You know, it's a northern city, it's got good access to the university, but it could always be better. I believe we are a Russell Group, aren't we?
Yes,
we are.
I think so.
And, you know, a lot of people will never get the opportunity to come somewhere like this, and that opportunity stops being available to them long before they fill in the UCAS form and sit their A-levels and all that. It's years before, and I think if we can improve the level of support given to them before 16 or even earlier, to give them increased chance of getting to a university like Sheffield or somewhere else as good as Sheffield, then I don't see anything wrong with that.
Tim, Anna wanted to lobby the government for the reintroduction of maintenance grants. She's got a one-year term. How realistic do you think that aim is?
I think with this kind of policy, you have to work with other universities, you have to work with the NUS, you have to have a top-down approach in terms of the logistics of the negotiating part, and then a bottom-up part in terms of mobilising the support and actually creating an atmosphere and an aura within, let's say, London. We've seen that 2011, 2012, 2015, where recently, again, where people were campaigning for better financial contributions towards students and better financial regularities in that sense. And I think that the fact that Theresa May has recently suggested that she potentially could bring back maintenance grants, given what Labour have done. That could be more achievable, but I think that's going to be based on...
Is it achievable in a year, though, do you think?
It's tough. I think it's going to be based on National Party politics and how quickly that can be sorted. Anything can happen with that, but again, it's a nice policy to have, but realistic, that's the issue.
Yeah. Absolutely. Aria, Chris spoke about having £5 worth of free printing and making sure that's equal across departments. This has been something that's been tried before, I think I'm right in saying that. Again, is that a worry for you that perhaps we're not learning from the mistakes of the past when it possibly didn't go so well before?
I think when Chris was clarifying that point, he did display a level of sort of that he'd thought about it, and he was referring to past events and how and also revealing that it's a bit more complicated than the sort of surface statement of the issue suggests. Now, I guess another thing to take into account is that everyone who comes here pays £9,000 a year, or more even. Yeah. But so really the method by which funds are allocated and stuff like that, and it's very complicated and there's lots of different things to take into account. So I don't think there's the harm in lobbying for something like that, and I think, you know, if it seems to be an important enough thing to people, then it should be worked for, yeah.
Ben, George spoke about removing the need for medical evidence on extenuating circumstances forms and things like that. Is that really a really naive policy, or is that... Because he spoke about putting trust on the students. Do you agree with that? Do you see the sense in that?
Well, I feel like there are sometimes circumstances in which people are unable to complete the work or go into university for reasons which aren't medically provable. And equally, this is again a circumstance I've never experienced. But equally, if there aren't other universities where that's the system and that's the case, and it works, maybe it could work here as well.
Aria, Anna spoke about focusing on people who aren't students in widening participation. Is that a worry because you mentioned it yourself, that the amount of money people pay to come here and to be here, should she be focusing on the people who voted her in and the students here, or on the students outside, the pre-16 students?
I guess I can understand the rationale behind sort of, you know, there are, as was said before, that there are people who have faced difficulties with getting to university that pop up before they're actually already in university. But I also think that, you know, we live in a sort of broad society, and if we try to make organizations like the union sort of take on all of those problems at the same time, rather than, being more, I guess, delegative with how different groups treat their problems, then you can end up kind of doing a messy job where someone else could have done it better. So it would also be a question of efficiency, as well as whether or not it should be done by this body.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to fire a horrible question at you. Who came out on top, Ben?
I think Anna did quite well, and George. I think Emma did well as well. Actually, I think they all did quite well.
That's not an answer.
Well, I'm going to say Anna.
Okay, Anna. Aria?
I think Chris, as I said before, demonstrated a kind of a breadth and depth to the thought.
Perspective as well, with being slightly older. And
yeah, that's also true. I think generally he demonstrated that he's got a sort of a wider perspective, and that he thinks more about these issues and stuff. I also think Anna had a lot of energy and displayed a lot of energy and drive, and kind of that she wasn't really going to back down from certain things that some people might have thought were too difficult for her to deal with. So I think those two did pretty well.
Tim?
I think all of them had their individual qualities and showed that throughout the debate. I think George came out firing, as I think Chris, in terms of the depth that he had, it was very clear that because he's been around for such a long time, he knew what he was doing. But I think for me, Anna was the one who came out on top, and it will be interesting to see what happens on elections night.
Certainly will, a week today. Guys, thank you very much indeed, and we are going to head back over to the View Deli because Luke is ready and waiting with the welfare debate.
Hello and welcome back to Forge Debates. We are here with the welfare candidates. So from left to right, we have Shaw, Molly, how do you pronounce it? Kian?
Kian, yeah.
Kian, sorry. Catherine and Gracer. So my first question for you is a bit of a warm-up question. When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? Gracie, we'll start with you.
I wanted to be a singer. Did you ever see the 80s cartoon Gem? I wanted to be like her with pink hair.
I've not seen that cartoon, but it sounds amazing, so I'm going to watch that when I get home. Catherine?
I wasn't ready for this confession so early on, but I was like a horse girl in primary school. And I wanted to be a riding instructor.
Kian?
I want to be rich, and now I'm running for welfare officer, so I don't think that's working out, but like, I'll give it a go.
That's fair. Molly?
I was a really boring child. For some reason, I really wanted to be a lawyer. I don't really know why, but it just really appealed to me. That's not the case anymore.
For me, I just want to be a pilot because, I mean, they will pay you money to watch out the window, and that's just my dream.
So, the first question of the night for you guys is, generally, you need to be a well-intentioned person to run for welfare, and I think that's reflected in all your policies. You talk about supporting people, encouraging healthy lifestyles, and just generally improving students' safety. So my question is, what makes you stand out? We'll go from left to right here. So, Shaw?
What makes me stand out is I work as a residence mentor for 2 years. I've seen so many issues that's been faced by students. I'm also the inclusion officer of International Student Committee, so I'm like indirectly taking care of 7,000 students' welfare. So I feel like, I mean, my experience will benefit me in like, you know, supporting people. And also, I'm kind of like a caring person, so if I see someone need help, I would want to help them. Yeah, so.
Molly?
So I have a lot of experience working with like patients, for example. So I've worked in a lot of different departments in hospitals. I was a phlebotomist for a year, and I've worked as a technician. So I've always enjoyed the welfare part of that the most, and the problem solving and just helping everywhere I can. I also volunteer with Flourish, which is a scheme that does activities with people with acquired brain injuries, and I really enjoy that. I was also the BME welfare officer last year, and I think that being a BME and being a woman gives me a particular perspective on the role that maybe other people don't have. So like I understand a lot of the stereotyping and a lot of the general ignorance that is unintentionally experienced by a lot of people who come to university, and I think those experiences would help me be quite understanding and empathetic, and find solutions more than anything else for problems that a lot of students are facing.
Kean? Aside from my 10 out of 10 looks, I have two main areas I want to go into. First of all, I think my track record in the past year as chair of LGBT committee and as a member of welfare committee, I've got involved in some really cool projects. So training residents mentors and improving the uni accommodation here in Sheffield, so that next year we should be one of the best nationally for LGBT students. I took a stand against a venue that wasn't taking sexual assault complaints seriously from students, and I was involved in challenging the university on platforming Islamophobic and transphobic guest speakers. But the other thing is, I think it would obviously be really lovely if I didn't like the other people sat here, but I actually think everyone is really great. But what's different for me is that I think everyone wants to kind of continue and carry on with what welfare has become over the past few years, and I think of all of us, I'm the one that wants to really steer this in a different direction. For me, I think it's time to acknowledge that welfare is political, and that welfare, it is okay to be about being angry, and it is okay to challenge things. We need to challenge having hate speech on campus. We need to challenge cut to support services for disabled and working class students, and we need to really stand up and say that welfare is a political issue. So I think that's what probably puts me a bit different in terms of where I'm stood compared to everyone else at the moment.
Do you not think that part of kind of making welfare political, though, would discourage people from actually participating in that welfare and benefiting from it?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. Like, if what you mean is that welfare...
If it's quite not aggressive as such, but political, if someone isn't really into the political side of it, they just need the help, do you think that they would not be put off slightly by that more political approach?
No. I think in terms of welfare provisions and welfare support, I think that if someone needs that support, I don't think the fact that welfare is political is a barrier to that. What I mean is that we need to be more political in demanding better welfare provisions and in what we expect of welfare provisions. And I think like a lot of us don't have a choice in whether we're political. Like a lot of us, like Molly was saying as a woman of colour, like you don't get to choose whether you're political. Like your identity is inherently political, and we don't have a stake in that. Like we have to. Like we don't get that choice, that's who we are. And I think that's why liberation is really at the forefront of my manifesto, because I think that that's something that really hasn't had that platform of voice in the past few years in the Students' Union. And so for me, I think like, I understand that being political is scary, and I understand that sometimes it feels like there's a bit of a barrier to getting involved, but like, we can't not be political. Some of the best work that students' unions have done over the years has been through being political and saying, actually, this isn't good enough. And I think that as a welfare officer of all the officers, that's really what you should make your role about.
Catherine?
I think I'd like to disagree with the idea that making welfare political cuts off students from getting involved, because I think welfare is political at every single level. I think the idea that savage mental health cuts aren't political, the idea that students are working 25 hours a week to be able to afford to attend university is political. The idea that marginalised students feel shut out of their education is political. I am co-chair and inclusionist officer of the biggest political society in the union.
Labour students, just in case, just because you were clearly trying to avoid saying it, but go on.
I'm co-chair and inclusions officer of Sheffield Labour Students. I'm proud of it. I'm proud to be a Labour Party activist, and I'm proud to care about student welfare, and I think the idea that those two are mutually exclusive is not only false, but actually dangerous. I think welfare is political for everybody at every single level, and I think my experience with the Labour Party, my experience on welfare committee, my experience campaigning for women's and LGBT issues, I've worked with women victims of human trafficking, I've campaigned on mental health. I think my experience speaks for itself, and I think the idea that welfare shouldn't be political is absurd.
Just really quickly though, what would you say, in 2 seconds, what would make you stand out then as a candidate? Just go back to the original question.
I think my experience and my policies and my passion speak for themselves. I think I've got a really... I understand the way that mental, physical and social well-being all work together. I think perhaps over the past few years we've seen a focus on more individual issues, and I think I understand the way you need to have balance with all of them and the issues we need to tackle to address that.
And Gracer?
So I'm on MHM, Mental Health Matters Society. I've been on it for 2 years and I'm now president. So obviously a lot of my manifesto focuses on mental health, and our campaign for this semester is Mental Health is Political. So we're a society that have often steered clear of talking about politics, but I think, as has been mentioned, I don't think you can depoliticise these issues. And what sets me apart is I have put student welfare first since coming to university. I've been Women's Councillor of the SU Council. I'm on Free Uni, and I work in the SU as well, so I provide a lot of support for students in the different roles that I've taken on, and that's how I think I'm set apart from the other candidates.
Just because you two have both spoke about welfare being political, do either of you have any views on that? Do you have any take on that as well? Anything that you'd like to add, or just more of the same, really?
I partially agree and partially disagree. I do agree that welfare is definitely political, and especially as Kathy said, with the cuts and things like that, and with liberation groups, it is political. But I do think that we have to be careful about making it too political, because I do think it could alienate a lot of students who, when you start bringing politics into it, it does tend to alienate some students who don't feel confident in those areas, so they might not feel confident joining in on the conversation, and that's another problem to be addressed. That's another issue. But I do think that there needs to be some kind of separation. And in addition to that, especially being a Black woman, I do know that it is sometimes quite difficult to be as aggressive as you would like to when it comes to political things, because of the way you can be stereotyped. So I don't know if I would think it would be a good idea to join those two things together, because it is so important that everybody gets the mental health support that they need.
Sure.
To me, it's the same with Molly.
Molly, yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be partially political and not, some part of it not too political, because, to me, I'm more focused on trying to solve an issue that's present. So, it's not that I don't support campaign at all. I support campaign, but I think that there's some issue that need to be solved before we campaign for something else. Yeah.
So, just going to move on to the next question now. Obviously, you've all mentioned mental health in your manifestos or tonight. It's a huge part of the role. However, there are a lot of other welfare issues related to student life. I just want to know what you think the main one of these issues is and how you plan to tackle it. So, we will start with Gracie on that one.
So second to mental health, I've also focused on housing in my manifesto. And I think a lot of these issues tie into mental health anyway, how nice your living accommodation is or who you live with does factor into these issues. So I don't think they can be taken really individually, but I have focused on housing separately with wanting to affiliate with ACORN and letting students know about their renting rights and challenging landlords. So, yeah.
Do you not worry that challenging landlords is something that's brought up a lot, and rent rights in these elections, and we've not really seen much progress on it? What is it about your points that you think could actually make credible change?
Well, I've planned to affiliate with ACORN, which are a really good union that have a lot of knowledge about your rights as renters, and they know the law and they know how to challenge landlords. If you have an issue, you can go and speak to them and they will speak to your landlord for you. And I think that's a different take on it than that's ever been done before. It's actually about applying the knowledge from someone that, the experts.
So, yeah, same question again. What other welfare issues do you think are important? Or other than mental health, which welfare issue do you think is most important? How do you plan to tackle it? We'll go to Kean on that.
So I personally think I'd choose to go down the line of safety and nightlife. I think in my 3 years here, safety and nightlife isn't something that I've personally noticed welfare officers focusing on, and I think often it gets left to the women's officer and that it's just a women's issue. And don't get me wrong, it disproportionately affects women, both hate crime and sexual assault. But what I mean is that it is a welfare issue, and that the welfare officers should be taking a more vocal stance. Earlier this year, as part of LGBT Plus committee, there's a venue that we were really well affiliated with, and students voiced the fact that they didn't feel comfortable, and when we tried to talk to staff about this, it was kind of turned back in our face, and we were told that these complaints weren't valid, and that's what led me to lead a stand against them. So I think there's things such as training door staff and managers on LGBT, BME and women's issues, because those three groups are disproportionately affected by sexual assault and by hate crime. And also getting better street lighting in student areas, because I know that myself and many other people don't feel safe walking home alone. And I think that it's easy to underestimate the power that Sheffield SU has, but actually we are a really big local force. And like actually if we talk to City Council and say, I don't feel safe walking up Northumberland Road, and I know that that's the case for hundreds of students, that actually we can work with City Council to address this. So I think safety in nightlife is something that A, the welfare officers should be taking more vocal stance on, and B, they could really make a difference by taking a stance on.
Okay, so just on that point about the streetlights, it is a huge, huge task and one that a lot of people have spoken about, and it's always met by a lot of obstacles from council. How do you think, what makes the difference about if you were running it, how do you think you would overcome them obstacles?
I think I'd be keen to particularly look into which areas students want street lighting in most, but also I think that my approach to being a sabbatical officer would definitely be about building community relationships, especially with City Council. That's something I've got to do a little bit within my role in LGBT chair this year, and I think really building a relationship with council. So I already know the councillor for the Crooks and Walkley Ward, which covers Northumberland Road, and I think it's working and addressing that these are issues that students face, and also that like we have former students going on to be councillors in wards near us, and that actually there's not as much of a disconnect as people might think. And I think it's sometimes about really reaching out and building that relationship and knowing where to go and how to achieve what you want to achieve. And I think that I'm a very strategic person. I know what I want, and I know that that's how I'm going to get it.
Sure. What do you think is the biggest issue other than mental health faced by students, and how do you plan to address it?
The other issue, I mean, one of the important issues is I think that need to be focused is residences in the university accommodation, because the thing is like if you've seen the price of accommodation compared to, let's say, private accommodation, university accommodation is much more expensive, and I think that need to be reduced, because I mean, like a lot of first year students, they came in and because the thing is that a lot of, especially international, they don't know the area well, so they think that the only option is like the university accommodation. So I'm thinking that, like, because a lot of people has been complaining about that it's being expensive, so I'm thinking that need to be addressed, and at the same time also improve safety of university accommodation as one of my point. Because the thing is like one of the thing I want to raise is like example Broad Lane Court. Every year there's a break-in, and I feel like the university haven't done enough to improve the safety of city accommodation, especially St. George's, Mapping and Broad Lane, because they don't have any security that's on the spot. They need every time they call security, it need to come from Enclave. So I'm thinking these 2 points are the one that I want to stress actually, like other than mental health.
And who would you lobby for that? Because obviously with it being a university issue, it's quite hard for the union to have an issue on. So how would you go about pushing for that change?
I will lobby the accommodation commercial service, because they are the one. I mean, they're the one in charge of the accommodation. And sorry, what's the other question again?
Just yeah, how would you go about lobbying with it? So who would you go about contacting? Basically, answer.
I think I'll try to meet up with those people who are working in the accommodation and talk to them and have a chat with them, see that where can we, I mean, because the thing is like city accommodation, as you can know, that like there's some that is owned by private company, and the university is just leasing from them. So I'm thinking like just maybe, you know, talk to them or ask students to do a petition about, you know, it's being too expensive and need to be raised down, like lower down, sorry.
Molly? Like I said, most important issue other than mental health?
Thank you for repeating the question. So basically, my manifesto mostly focuses on mental health, but I have a longer policy list on my Facebook page. I've included things about inclusion, housing, and safety. So similar to what Kian said, about finding out where students feel the least safe and trying to kind of address it. So by lobbying for more streetlights. In terms of inclusion, I think it would be useful to have workshops quite similar to the consent workshops, just so that we can address some of the misconceptions, the stereotypes, and some of the ignorances that we all bring to university, because we all come from such different backgrounds that I think that having open and honest discussions about these things would actually have a bigger impact than people give it credit for. So if we had those kind of workshops, I think that people would feel more at home and more comfortable in Sheffield. And just quickly going back to the safety issue, like has been said about getting home from club nights, a lot of people stay really late at the library as well. So that's another issue. So I would like to work with City Taxi, and we already have a relationship with them because we have the U-Card scheme with them, to have a student pool option on their app, so that students who are going home from the library or from a night out from the same area to the same area, because students tend to live in the same area, can share taxis, split the costs, avoid walking home on their own, or avoid paying the £5 to £8 that students really just don't have just to get home.
Just to pick you up on one of them points, we spoke a little bit before about consent workshops and how it's hard to get people to attend, who maybe the people that benefit most from these workshops. How would you go about getting people to attend the workshops that you spoke about?
See, I kind of disagree with the women's officer candidate, as in I completely understand what she means about there's kind of an irony of forcing people to go to consent workshops, but the truth of the matter is people don't often do the things that they're supposed to do. So I do think it would be good to get them registered, and just to just to give people that incentive that, yeah, you should go, because a lot of people, when we did the consent workshops in first year, didn't want to go and really slated it, but then after they went, they said, actually, that was a really good experience, that was really useful. So sometimes you just have to give people that push.
And what would that push be?
Registering it and continuing, and like, if people don't go to it, you organise another one and they must go to it.
I think that would meet a lot of backlash from people being forced into it, but I can understand where you're coming from. I think a lot of people would respond with, I shouldn't need to go, but
do you not think that eventually that they would, like...
They would hopefully see the light of it? I mean, I could only speculate.
At the same time, though, like, when we have such issues with discrimination around campus, and I know we all like to think it's over, but it's truly not. I think it's really important that we look into those issues, and I think Molly's completely right. Like, even though it's sad that you have to make it mandatory for people to engage in the fact that these are issues, these are big issues, and while they might not seem like that to most students, the students that are part of these communities, these liberation groups that are so seriously affected in their time here, like, we definitely owe it to them to make this compulsory.
Fair enough. Sorry, we are very short on time. Catherine, last one.
So I think what's really exciting about my manifesto is that all the policies really work together. I think you're right in that there has been a big focus on mental health recently, and it's amazing, I think, the way the conversation about mental health has changed in recent years. But I think we need to understand the way mental, physical and social health all work together. And so I've got policies on a really broad range of things, with everything from, making the gym more accessible to tackling housing. But one policy that I'm really, really excited about is reforming drug policy. I'm really, really passionate about education and safety and harm reduction with drugs. And I think, as we've seen of recent events in the past year, this is a massive issue and we can't ignore it, and we can't hope that a poster or a disclaimer is going to solve the problem when students' lives are at stake. It's something that I'm so passionate about tackling.
That's fair enough. So we are going to have to wrap up there for the welfare candidates. So again, it is Shaw, Molly, Cian, Catherine and Gracer. We're going to go over to the studio now for pundits. Up next, sport.
Thanks. I love back in the studio with our lovely pundits. We have Ben, we have Josie and we have Stephen. What did you guys think of that debate?
I thought it was a good debate. I think it covered. I think some of the other debates got caught up on certain topics that lasted maybe too long in the space of a debate. But I think this one covered quite a few, and that's what I really liked about this debate specifically.
I didn't think it was quite as rowdy as some of the ones, like maybe education. I think that there was quite a lot of overlap in ideas, and that perhaps meant that not as much debate could actually happen because there wasn't so much of a difference in the candidates.
Yeah, I think it was a lot more agreeable than the other ones we've had tonight, were just because, as Cian said, everyone's he likes everyone there and he thinks they're all great and all that. It's like they all get along. And I feel like in some other positions maybe that isn't the case, but a lot of the people there, all they want is to improve the welfare of the people at this SU, and they might disagree about who's the best person to do it or what the best way to do it is, but at the end of the day they've all got the same end goal.
And I think that's possibly just one of those things that comes out of being the welfare officer, is that they're the people who want to do that. We have 8 candidates. We have only 5 that showed up today. What do you think that's going to do for the campaigns of the 3 that didn't arrive? Josie?
well, it's not going to do any good, I don't think. I don't think that necessarily appearing at the debates makes a difference in terms of the campaign, but I think it shows that they're probably not, putting absolutely everything into it, and it probably reflects the amount of work they're putting into that campaign. So I would be surprised if one of the 3 people who didn't turn up today end up winning the position.
I agree, to be honest. I don't feel it would be a disaster to the campaign, but like you said, it certainly doesn't do it any favours.
Perhaps we should move on from there. There may be real reasons, maybe very good reasons why they didn't turn up, but I guess we'll never know. Do you think there was any standout points from those manifestos or any parts of that debate that really made you think something different from there? Change your mind on a candidate, perhaps?
I quite like Kian's point on safety on nights out, because I think a lot of people get caught up in thinking that that the welfare officer remit is specifically limited to mental health, and it's not. I feel like all of them have tried to widen the debate a little bit, and that's quite good. The parts of the debate where we weren't just talking about mental health, we were talking about apart from the safety at nights out thing, which they all
we had talks about drug policies, we had talk about safety, we had talk about housing, we had talk about inclusions as well as consent workshops.
I completely agree with you there, Ben. Actually, that's one of the reasons I like this debate a lot, is it covers so many issues, and like you said, safety on nights out is an important thing. I liked how Kian pointed out that it wasn't. I know it disproportionately affects women, but it does affect all students. So I like how he raised that, and it's obviously a very important issue to address in the welfare officer position.
Was there a particular point that stood out for you, Josie?
Yeah, I think what kind of stood out to me wasn't necessarily like a particular policy area, but just talking about engagement with Sheffield as a whole, in particular Sheffield City Council, because I feel like a lot of the time people get disengaged with student politics because they think it doesn't make a big impact. And, what's it going to do? Change things in the SU shop. It's all very isolated. But I think if the officers reach out and get involved with the city as a whole, that's how you can make real changes. And you can do things like, turn up to council meetings, hand in petitions. You can actually get the councillors to listen to you. It's not that difficult.
Do you think that should be much more of a focus of the officer roles going forward, to branch out their engagement in this wider city?
I'm not sure necessarily for welfare, but I think maybe with the officers as a whole, if they're wanting to do campaigns like they were talking in education about lobbying, I think going to the council is a better way actually achieving that than the university acting on its own.
I think that's a very good point. Do you think perhaps that there is a standout candidate for you now after watching that debate? General? Perhaps Stephen could start us off on that
for
one.
me, it's between Catherine and Kian. I think they both did a really good job in getting the points across. Clearly, they didn't linger on something for too long. Very concise. They're very clear about what they want. So for me, it's those two.
Yeah.
And what about you, Ben?
I feel like I have to agree with Stephen. Those two are. I know they're both very experienced in the union in different societies, and I feel like they've probably been preparing for this for quite a while. And I feel like, although some other people did quite well, I thought Molly did quite well tonight. I feel like Stephen, they're the top two.
Would you agree with that, Josie?
Yeah, I think Molly and Gracie both did really well, but it's Catherine and Kian that really stood out as well. But I do feel like the difficulty is that there is going to be a lot of overlap, and the vote's going to be split. They're both on welfare committee. Who knows what's going to happen, really.
It's one of those roles that they always seem to come up from the union in those sorts of ways. Do you think there's one person who is perhaps most qualified for the role, and do you think that is the person who will end up getting it? I'll start with you, Stephen.
Well, Molly has had a lot of experience, especially in hospital work. She's a very well-rounded person, but then again, you've got Gracie, who is president of the Mental Health Matters. So I think they're all quite experienced, I felt.
What about you, Ben?
Did Kian say that he was chair of the welfare committee, or was it LGBT?
I believe so, yes.
Well, I feel like that's a big qualification for him. But obviously they have all got their own experience in their own right. But I feel like Catherine, with the backing of the Labour Student Society, which historically can be quite helpful in winning these kind of roles, I feel like she's maybe got the chance to edge it after tonight.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So what do you think after all our little analysis we've had here, is there someone that you would be particularly surprised if they did win? Let's look at it that way. Perhaps
The
start
people
with
who didn't
Josie.
turn up?
Yeah,
Probably.
Of the candidates that did turn up.
Like anyone who isn't Catherine or Kian or Gracie, I think.
So it's between 3 candidates just for you now.
Yeah, I think they've been campaigning very strongly, and I think they've got the links with the necessary societies, and that enough people know them. Quite sadly, that's kind of.
So what would you say is the number one point from their manifesto that you are excited to see go in place? Start with you, Ben.
I feel like I have to go back to the safety at night thing. I know a lot of people will end up going out on West Street and they'll end up walking back because that cab's just a little bit too expensive. And it can be quite scary walking down roads like that road between the 2 parks up in Crooksmore. That's not a nice place to walk. Even at like 11 or midnight, it's not a nice way to go. I feel like if there's some way we can work on improving that by working with the city or working with the people who live here, then that's a good thing.
I've got to agree with Ben there. It's safety on nights out, because I know for first years, if a lot of them live in Endcliffe, it's a little bit better because there's 24-hour security around Endcliffe, and the Broom Hill's obviously quite populated anyway throughout the night with the takeaways. But if you live further out, maybe in Crooksmore, you do have to walk through dark and narrow streets, and I completely agree with there. It's an important thing, and I'm glad they touched upon it.
Is there a different policy perhaps for you, Josie, or is it the nights out safety as well?
I think nights out safety is brilliant, but what kind of stood out to me that seemed kind of new to me anyway was drug policies, because I think it's an inevitability that some people are going to take drugs, some students are going to take drugs, and I think it's great if you can do anything to ensure that they're going to take them safely. But I do think it will be a very difficult thing to implement, and the union and the university would probably push against it, but I do think overall it could, be a form of like harm reduction, really.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting this year that it is branched out from mental health, which is the primary focus, and I think you're right that sometimes the policies that they want to have can be quite difficult to implement. Is there somebody in that group that you think is going to be the best at, say, implementing those difficult policies?
I think both Kian and Catherine obviously have a history of campaigning. I believe Kian's campaigns officer for Welfare Committee, so he leads a lot of campaigns there, and obviously as co-chair of LGBT, Catherine, co-chair of students, like they've both got a history of campaigning, so I've got no doubt that they'll be able to like lobby the union itself or like wider to try and get their policies in place.
I think that's definitely going to be what it comes down to, is the people who the voters believe is going to be the one who can make the biggest difference. And on that note, we are going to go back to the debate, and we're going to rejoin Luke for the sports officer debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to Forge Debates. This is the last debate of tonight. I'm here with the sports officer candidates. So from left to right, we have Hope, Sarah, Sass, Gemma, and Sarah again. So that's Sarah Dewitt, or Dewhurst, is it?
Dewhurst.
Dewhurst, sorry. And Sarah Morse. So my first question, just a bit of a warm-up question. Who is the greatest sports person of all time? So, Sarah, we'll start with you.
I'm going to stick loyal to my sport, tennis, and say Serena Williams. I think she's an inspirational to not just people within tennis, but amongst the whole sporting community. She stands up for women's equality in sport, and also from being from a black woman, she also supports. Sorry, this answer's going on face.
It's all right.
Sorry. She's always defended.
One, so it's fine.
Okay, she's always defended minority ethnic groups in sport too.
Perfect. Gemma?
Jessica Ennis. She's amazing. She's just amazing. I think she's great, and she has great abs as well.
Nice. It is Sass.
I'm going to go with Tom Daley because he did his GCSEs and his A-levels all while his dad had cancer, and was an Olympic diver, so I think that's pretty impressive. And when his father passed, he still did the Olympics and is still a reigning athlete. So,
Sarah?
Technically 2 people, but I'm going to go with the Brownlee brothers.
Yes. and hope.
I like Mo Farah or Usain Bolt, who he ate McDonald's throughout the Olympics because it's the only thing he trusted. That's pretty cool. So, chicken nuggets.
So my first proper question is for Sarah.
Yeah.
So you've pledged to make gym memberships cheaper. How do you plan to subsidise this?
Wait, I pledged to... Oh, the subsidised gym memberships for club members. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at how much everybody is paying for their club memberships and do a bit of a tally and knock it off the price.
Do you not think that the clubs themselves would need that money elsewhere? Hence why they charge that as part of their fee?
Yeah, that is true. I think that Sports Sheffield have had a bit of an issue with their financial budget with Steve leaving this year, and I think that the whole financial system for Sports Sheffield needs to be reviewed. Things like the books entries funding, it all needs to be reviewed, and I think the subsidised gym memberships for club members falls under this whole big review.
Yeah, I've also got the same policy, but I actually have looked into doing what Sarah just said about knocking off what sports teams pay, but I myself pay £30 fees for my cheer team. However, a team like American football pay over £100, so I don't think it's fair to have them have 3 times as much money taken off. It should be equal, so I've suggested the same thing, but when looking into it, that doesn't work. And realistically, for a £250 membership for the year, if you're taking away half of that, the gym won't agree to it. It's a separate business at the end of the day. If you're going to do something, it needs to be more realistic, like a 10% or 20%, like a student discount, rather than taking fees off.
Can I just ask, how would you stop people then from not joining a club that's like £15 to get a 10%, 20% discount off of the gym, rather than someone than like, I don't know, I know tennis pay a couple of £100 for their gym membership. What's the difference with that price? Like, why would I not just go and pay like £15 to do walking club or something and get a discount?
Because if you're already going to the gym already, the gym are getting that. So, whacking out my stats, sorry. I did some of my own polls, basically, because I had a lot of people saying that it wouldn't work. So I actually looked into it a lot more. And when you subsidise gym membership, you're going to get more people that are already going to places like the gym in town that people can drive to or get the bus to or get a lift with. If they're going to that instead of S10, if reducing the fees by that much, I understand what you're saying, like, people could join a club to get a reduced membership, but if they're paying that money, at the end of the day, they're getting the money out of it, they're going to get the membership from it. It doesn't really matter why they're doing it. If it's going to get more people there, that's all they're going to really care about.
So, speaking of stats, and I don't know if it's on one of your cards, but you've proposed a Raw season ticket. Do you have a figure of how much roughly that would cost?
No, I don't, but I have looked into it because previously, 2 years ago, another sports officer tried to do it and it messed up with the whole TIA system. So I've gone away and done my homework and looked into why it went wrong. So when you have big events like UXD or Varsity, if your team member or your social sec is going down to get tickets at like 6 a.m. To get 50 tickets for your team and 30 of them have got a TIA, your TIA will be messed up. So say for example, if I get in as sports officer, I've got the whole of June, whole of July, or whole of August to sit down with Sports Sheffield and with the university and be like, look, I want to do this, how is it going to work? So I know that it's not worked in the past, so I know where it's gone wrong, so I feel like I know how to sort it out.
So do you not worry that, I mean, sport has this preconception of being quite cliquey at points. Do you not worry that by adding a huge kind of pay barrier at the start of the year, you're making it more cliquey and less inclusive?
No, because the ticket would be available to anyone, not just on a sports team. I didn't make that clear in my manifesto. I've actually had people from like Dance Society who have been like, we come to Raw every week, but we're not actually a sport, and they're interested in getting one. It's not, this season ticket would be available to anyone. It's not making it cliquey.
Not exclusive to sports team, but no, not cliquey to sports team, sorry, but cliquey to those who can afford what would probably be between £80 and £100 at the start of the year for a fresher who's just started and don't really know what they're doing. That is quite a big pay barrier to be basically, do you want to socialise with us or do you not want to socialise with us?
It isn't necessarily a pay barrier. I mean, when the freshers come, they probably won't know what Raw is and they probably won't want 100% commit to it. It's more for the second and third years that have spent a lot of money in first year loving Raw and loving their socials, and they're like, oh, I can actually get a benefit out of it, because if you look at the Tuesday Club ticket, you could say the exact same for that. How a fresher's going to know that they're going to love to go to Tuesday Club every week? Like, they're not going to know in their first year. If they want to commit to it, that's fine, but it's worked well for Tuesday Club, so I don't see why it wouldn't work for Raw either.
Okay, so just the opinion of the captain of the women's hockey club. They said a season ticket just wouldn't work, and I'd stand by the decision made a few years ago. My opinion is that a larger initial cost at the beginning would deter a lot of freshers from joining the club. Obviously, you spoke that it would be more aimed at second and third year, but again, do you not think it's unfair that the established students, the people who are already in these cliques, let's be honest, or different clubs, different sports, have got priority over people who are joining and are looking to get involved?
No, because one of my other policies on my manifesto is that I want to sort out the TIA system, which I know some of the other girls have gone for as well. So by doing that, I would enable that it would be fair. So I understand what you're saying about it would be pressuring first years, but it's not a pressure. It's not a must. I'm not saying that you can only go to Raw every week if you buy this ticket. It's obviously an option.
But the ones that sell out, you would struggle to get in if you didn't have a season ticket.
Not if I sort the TIA system out, which I'm planning to do.
Can you just confirm what the TIA system is for those who aren't aware?
So the TIA system is a system that sports teams use to reserve tickets. So instead of going and getting 30 tickets at the union, we have the accessibility to get up to 80% or 100 tickets. So there's a problem with it at the beginning of big events, because we go down at like 6 a.m. to get tickets and it sells out rapidly because people are like, oh, everyone's going to want a ticket. So we have people buying as many tickets as they can and then selling them on later, which is exactly what happened at Christmas this year.
Could I just point out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, one of my points is to try and create a fair ticket allocation system, because at the minute, so for example, with the TIAs, they all get signed off beforehand, but actually the union was probably, or I'm assuming the events office must have known beforehand that they were signing off far more tickets than were going to be available capacity to get into Foundry and Fusion. So I do think, I think the sort of creating a fairer ticket allocation system is something that should definitely be done. Whether we add season tickets or loyalty cards, like Sarah's suggesting, that they can be debated, but I think the TIA is something that definitely is a really important issue that needs to be brought up, looked at this year.
Yeah, definitely. Sarah, interestingly, you are next on the card. So, you say you will develop a strategic plan for the move to Norton. Could you explain a bit what you intend to do?
Okay, so for those who don't already know, so the university's plan to build a new social science building on the top pitches at Goodwin, and essentially I want to create a fair and smooth transition of moving to Norton, because, for example, the hockey club especially is going to be affected in the terms of having to now get travel to Norton. All of sort of intramural activities that take place on those top pitches, are they going to transition to Norton as well? I just think we need to have a development strategy and plan to ensure that it's fair for all students. And then, for example, with football, for example, who might be on the lower pitches that might not be actually affected, that the fact that there's going to be a higher demand for the pitches because there's going to be a building on one of them, that needs to be looked at as well. So my sort of plan, it would probably be longer than a year, so I just like to kind of start the initial kind of ball rolling. But I think in the future, Norton has the potential to be like a really good Sports Sheffield hub, especially if the university continues to sort of encroach on some of the great spaces that we have on the campus for the students here.
Okay. So my next question is for Gemma. Getting Wednesday afternoons off is a very popular campaign policy, with sports candidates historically always saying it, and everyone thus far has failed. So what makes you different?
So I think you have to start with promoting it to the university and how it's going to benefit the students. Obviously it's been tried before and it's not been successful. But I think we need to promote the universities, which is one of my other policies, is to promote the benefits of exercise and good nutrition on mental health. And I think mental health is such a current topic that actually, for the university's benefit in terms of how students will probably perform if in their academic studies, if they're going to have Wednesday afternoons free so they can represent Sheffield in sport, then they are more likely to come around to it. It's a way of... You need to sit with like the Educations Board and like promote how, why it needs to be done in the first place, why it's important for students to actually be a part of their club and represent. And also you can look at timetabling and why, where I had it in my second year, I was in labs, so couldn't go and play rugby on a Wednesday afternoon. And the response I got was, you either have to choose a different module or not play sport. Like it was like an ultimatum that I was given, and I think actually like the university should be more open to students wanting to represent Sheffield in sport. It's an important part of university life.
Absolutely. So, my next question is for Hope. You say you want to encourage clubs to host beginners and development events, encourage involvement through Give It a Go and social sport, and encourage inclusive and accessible socials.
Yeah.
So a lot of work has already been done in these areas. What specifically do you want to do to further promote this?
Okay, great. So one of the things that I think is really important and that clubs can really adopt is beginner and development events. Not only are they great for your beginner and development players because it provides them an opportunity to play, get to know the game in a competition that isn't bucks, but it's also hugely beneficial financially for clubs. So this October, our team ran a 2-day tournament at Ponds Forge, and we managed to raise £1,000 just as profit from this one tournament. And that's helped us hugely with our club and our funding, and means that our membership costs can be lower. So not only is it great for our development players, but it's also great financially for the clubs, and it's something that I really want to encourage people to do by giving them the skills and the resources, teaching them how to run these things.
Is this as an add-on to social sport, or...?
It's completely separate to social sport. I think the promotion of social sport and Give It a Goes is amazing, and I really want to push that and increase that. But the development tournaments are something else that I think can be adopted by many other clubs. It's so almost simple and easy to run if you have the tools, and I want to give the clubs the tools to be able to do this.
Are you not worried that this is going to detract from social sport? You know, we've really struggled to keep up the funding for social sport. You know, we don't want to detract anyone from it when we fought so hard to get this funding.
Okay, so I do not think that it will. So the beginners tournament that we run has been going on since 1998, and we still run a very successful weekly social sport session. Therefore, I do not think that making development tournaments would detract from social sports at all. In fact, I think it might even encourage more people to attend. If they really enjoy a tournament, they might want to train weekly in a more kind of friendly way. So actually, I think it might benefit it more.
I think, I think just one thing that's really important to highlight is that the sports officer is not only just coming from a club position, that's usually the case, but actually I think it's about only 6,000 students out of about 30,000 take part in club sports. So I think it's just really important to bear in mind when we're talking about policies and getting people involved, that club sport's only one vehicle for students to get involved in. So it's important to not sort of get our heads too shut down with club sport.
That's absolutely a very good point, because it leads right on to my next question, which is that 93% of students in the survey, who were surveyed, said they felt barriers to engaging in sport. What do you think is the biggest barrier students face, and how are you going to best tackle it? We'll start with Sarah.
So I think one of the biggest barriers, which is actually nicely about my manifesto, I've got 4 main barriers, but I guess if I was to pick one, I'd probably say it's the lack of time. I think students sort of, quite rightly so, have a lot of pressure on the academic, have a lot of commitment to their academic work, and so for a lot of students, they sometimes feel like they don't have the time to go to the gym, do a walk, get involved in club sport, and so I feel like I would try and promote the role of sport and exercise in managing your academic workloads and stress as a student.
Gemma?
So this is kind of one of my policies as well. It's improving the links between clubs and their respective intramural and social sport programs. I think it's important to show that you can have a competitive side of sport and also not as competitive. As the whole point of social sport. Intramural as well is kind of in between. That's my role on sports committee, social sport and intramural. That is literally what I tell everyone. There is a level of sport for everyone at Sheffield, and I think people need to just be aware of that. There's an option for you. There are barriers for clubs. What Sarah said, joining club sport, but actually, I think they just need to be educated, and there's something for everyone.
How would you go about educating people then?
So I think, first of all, obviously we have massive things going for social sport, and there's loads of publicity around that. They try and promote it as much as they can. But I actually think by improving the links between the clubs and intramural. So you've got like the girls for netball, the umpires are sunk players mostly, or the club players mostly. The same as touch rugby, like I ref touch rugby is along with rugby union boys, so they're part of clubs. And I think it's getting that link in. And having the people that go to those sessions and saying, actually, you know, have you considered joining? As well as having, we have sport development meetings as well, which have the social sport staff on, like club captains and everything. Which
so really quick with this one.
I was just going to say, what would your suggestion be for people who don't even come to the intramural stuff? What about people? How would you mobilise those people who don't get involved in intramural?
So, as in, if they just wanted to like go to the gym or get active anyway.
What would you suggest?
Yeah, so that's like my other point with having beginner sessions in the gym. It's having an accessible option for everyone at any level. So if they just want to go to the gym and they are new to it, that's why there's gym inductions, but also to have a beginners section in a beginners session in the weight section. Anyone can go, and it's just to boost confidence and get anyone involved.
Sass?
Can you quickly repeat the question?
Sorry, yeah. What do you think is the biggest barrier students face, and how are you going to best tackle this? Really quickly with these.
Okay, so very short. I think that when we do the sports fair and when we introduce sports to freshers or every year to second and third years, we have a lot of publicity around it, and we have captains and coaches and social secs publicising the teams. I think that majority of teams have an inclusions officer, but I don't feel like the inclusions officer are actually that involved until people are in the team. So I think it would be really beneficial actually to have an inclusions officer that works with the captains of their team to get people enticed in their sport, to get people, whether it's social sport, whether it's intramural, whether it's society sport, whatever it is. I think it's really important that there's someone that people can turn to, that everyone knows, whether they're at sports fairs, whether they're on the concourse, wherever they are at the beginning of the year, to get people involved. For those people that aren't very sure if they want to join, whether they don't feel good enough. I've had plenty of girls in my second year coming up and they're like, oh, I wish I did this in second year, but I came to the auditions and then I panicked. And it's like, if we had that person there to stop that happening and was like, reassure them and be like, look, it's great, we do this, we do this, we do this. If it's not for you, then it's not for you. But sorry.
Sarah?
I think following on from Saskia's point, I think one of the biggest barriers for students is themselves and their own self-confidence. I think that's why, you know, the promotion of social sports and Give It a Goes is really important. And also just touching on Gemma's point, I think it's a really good idea to bridge the gap between intramural and club sport, because people don't always have the confidence to join club sport, but they do for intramural.
I totally agree. I think that one of the biggest barriers is confidence. And the way I'd like to tackle this is by increasing the amount of Give It a Goes and beginner-friendly sessions. It's so daunting trying to turn up to a training session, especially if it's midway through the semester. And the way we can reduce this kind of scaredness, it's not my word, but is by increasing the amount of beginner-friendly sessions. And I think that's will hugely help, give people the confidence to turn up.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being quick on them last two. So that's the end of the sports debate and the end of Forge Debates 2018. Just again, your sports candidates are Hope, Sarah, Sass, Gemma and Sarah. That's it from us. Again, the person in my ear is telling me to hurry up. So thank you to everyone who was involved in production, especially all the people behind the scenes. We're going to go over to the Puntry. Don't forget to vote before voting opens on Monday at 10 a.m. and closes on Thursday at 5 p.m. Make sure you get your vote in before then. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we'll pass over to the studio. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Luke. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by three pundits to discuss a little bit more about what we saw there. They are Tim Adams, Josh Taylor and David Marriott. So if I can start with you, Tim, there was some interesting stuff raised there, not least Saskia's idea about a raw season ticket. That's been quite controversial. It hasn't worked in previous years. She insists she can make it work. Do you think she can?
It's going to be a tough issue, because this has been an issue which has been around for such a long time. Many people, sports officers included and presidents included in the past, have discussed this and have always found it difficult. I guess they can use the precedent, if you like, of what they have at the Tuesday Club, which is a season ticket there. The difference is at the Tuesday Club you go in individually, at Raw you go in groups. So if if, let's say, you get a group of 30 and you get 20 people get the season ticket and 10 people get left out, and that on a balance, that could be quite difficult to manage over the long term. So they've got to iron out that. It is possible, it's definitely, probably this year more likely than any other year, but they have to iron out those.
Why more likely this year?
I think because mistakes have been made in the past, and they have pointed that out in the debate just then, and if they can learn from those mistakes, then certainly they can understand why they were made and implement their decisions now.
The problem though, Josh, isn't it that it becomes, as Luke said, it adds barriers, it adds a financial barrier? Is that not the worry?
Yeah, I mean, with a season ticket, Luke was talking about, it might be £80 to £200 he may be paying. I think that what Sarah was saying about a fair ticket allocation is much more realistic. Not just with Raw about the season tickets, about Pop Tarts. Well, they tried to do a Pop Tart season ticket, that didn't even happen. So I think a fair ticket allocation is much more realistic because, let's face it, Raw is for the sports teams, the teams around, for around kind of the sports societies in Sheffield. So letting them have a fair ticket allocations, I think, a bit fairer, a bit more realistic, as they can probably go and say maybe one week a team has more tickets than other teams who had more tickets early in the month. So I think a fair ticket allocation, what Sarah was saying, is much more realistic and much more financially realistic as well than a Raw season ticket.
You said it's realistic. David, it's a huge task. Would you say it's the biggest task that the sports officer faces, the ticket allocation system? Because it's such a huge system to try and overhaul.
I'd say the biggest task for the sports office is whatever people say to them is something they need to be implementing the most. So obviously the Raw season ticket is something that's tried to be implemented in the past, and clearly the fact that they're still trying to implement this policy shows the fact that it means a lot to a lot of people. But there are also other important areas of sport that they need to consider, the fact that we're going to be moving to Norton as well. They're building on the Goodwin pitches, and I think that's equally important because they are sports officers. They need to actually focus on the sporting activities as well, rather than just sort of the extracurricular nightlife as such. So I think whilst the Raw season ticket policy is something that a lot of people care about, I think they do need to keep their options open as well.
How disruptive, if at all, will the move to Norton be, do you think? How difficult will that be?
It's been discussed in the plans for a long time, so I think people now have realised that if they got plan A and plan A doesn't work, they go to plan B and C and so on. The problem is because so many sports are played on Goodwin, you've got to transfer all of those to Norton, so you've got to accommodate for all, not just the lines and the pitch, but you've got to accommodate for the facilities backstage, the infrastructure's got to be in place, the changing room's got to be in place, the equipment's all got to be moved. It's a big task, but I think it's one which is going to, what's going to happen now, but it's one which is pretty needed, and Norton have to prepare themselves for that. And if there is any place which can do it, that's the place.
Josh, Gemma wants Wednesday afternoons off. It has, again, been another policy that's been sort of thrown about for a while. How can she make it work? Why this year?
I think it's probably one of the most unrealistic policies that a candidate could say. I mean, sport is very important, but I think your degree takes precedence over that. I know there's a lot of courses, like say journalism students have Wednesdays off most of the time. So there are a number of courses who have Wednesdays off. I don't believe that lecturers and tutors will come in again to basically take specialist seminars for sports athletes and stuff and people of that nature. So I believe that it probably won't happen. It'll be a very, very hard policy to implement. And I think there's other ways around it for athletes. I think they should. I mean, there's probably online classes you might be able to set up. Maybe some over Mole can be set up. But if you want to sit more seminars and more lectures, that isn't going to happen for maybe a fraction of the students on a course. If you have 200 students on a course, maybe 30 or 40 of them may be athletes at a push. I don't think they're going to set up lectures for those 40 athletes. So I think there needs to be something set up on Mole or on the internet that can help those athletes catch up. But it's a very unrealistic policy to implement.
Just going back to the participation issue, David, Hope wants to encourage clubs to host more beginners and developmental events, but there was some concern about how that would work with social sport, whether that would sort of affect the impact and the effect that social sport has. Can you see that becoming a problem?
I think it's definitely a possibility and something that she need to look out for. She does get elected as sports officer. I think the Give It a Go classes are one of the most successful things that we have here in Sheffield. The fact that you can take up a sport with no pressure of being judged whatever your ability is, because everyone around you is going to be doing the same thing. They're trying the sport for the first time. But I think the social sport aspect is also equally important. The fact that we as students have to balance our work-life sort of workloads. And I think if people don't get the opportunity to participate in these social sports because people are trying to just get into a sport at a casual level that they may not necessarily continue with, I think that could definitely become an issue, and it will be something that she needs to monitor.
The biggest issue, though, for the sports officer, Tim, is surely, Luke mentioned it there, 93% of students, when surveyed, said that they felt barriers when taking part or participating in sport, or to participate in sport. That is a huge number.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me on the basis that if you come to university, I mean, I come from Essex, and I came up to Sheffield, played a bit of football before, joined the journalism football team. 5'8" in an 11-a-side goal is a barrier in itself. But the fact that it took me a fair bit of time to get used to that, and I can see why a lot of people think that. And I was actually speaking to somebody a few months ago who took up, I think it was from memory, canoeing or rowing, one of those sports, and they have never done it before at all. They tried to give it a go. They went to one of the social sports events as well. They got involved in that. They went into the ranks and they competed at varsity last year and ended up winning the race. So it does show that it can be done, but the facilities have got to be there in place, and not just tangible facilities in that sense, but mental facilities, is that people have got to say to them, look, you can do this. We'll provide you the patience and the wisdom, if you like, to actually get this done and make sure you can get up this ladder.
Very quickly then, on the basis of that, David, who came out on top?
I think it would be very hard to call a close winner, but for me personally it would have to be Hope, because I think her policies are the most financially sound and the most realistic to be implemented within her time as sports officer.
Just one name?
Sarah. I think, unlike Hope, I think her policies also kind of capture every student at University of Sheffield, just not just the athlete.
Okay, and Tim, a name?
I think Sarah as well, on the basis that she has a broad platform from social sport to the transition from Goodwin to Norton as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, guys. And that is it then for Forge Debates. Thank you very much for watching. Keep up to date with all the election stuff on the forgetoday.com/elections website. Get involved with the hashtag KnowYourVote, and a 1 week today, Thursday, 1st of March, results night, 7:30 p.m. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week.